Anyway, we're getting more people in. We'll start to get going a little bit. Wish happy Father's Day to all the dads out there and all the father figures. I mean, so many folks are great father figures and fathers and folks who are a part of lives of folks at church and other family members that you've got. And there's some that are soon to be dads like Chris. But it's a great day. It's so much fun for it to be Father's Day, not because you get a bunch of stuff, whatever. It's an awesome privilege to be a dad. So there's a lot of you guys out there that are good father figures to my kids, and we count a lot of the folks, just about everybody, minus a few. I'm kidding. We count everybody at Falls Church as family, and so it's great to have a lot of men at church who take time with Kate and Owen, and I know that we try to do the same with so many other kids to be good examples and to have the family that we do. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this class, and we're nearing the end. We are about to crawl over the finish line next week, if you will. And I want to say how much I appreciate you guys joining me every week. I appreciate the work that you all have put into being with us every morning. And you may think, well, it's not work. Well, to some degree it is. It's getting up, it's logging in, it's a commitment, and I really appreciate that. I've gotten a lot of comments over the last many weeks about the class, and it's hard to say thanks for class at times, because we're talking about stuff that can be hard to hear, and it can be difficult for us as Christians to internalize and really think over. But I've been highly appreciative of the comments, but I've been more appreciative of y'all being a part of it. And I hope that it's been something that has strengthened your faith. I hope that it has been something that the various parts of this study brought something new into your mindset, into how you think and how you look at the gospel, and how, of course, how we look at each other differently, how we consider the family of community at Falls Church to not just be something as a group of people that are in the building, or if last night you came up to the parking lot, we watched a great movie from the back sides of our cars, socially distancing, but it was a lot of fun. Things like that we've done for so long. And of course, the last several months, we haven't been able to do a lot of it. And so a lot of our interactions have been remotely. A lot of our interactions have been from a distance. And it's really challenged the way that we think about our community of faith. It's been a challenge at times, probably for you, for me, for all of us, about how we think about our faith in general, with something that has been what has gone on for so many weeks. But y'all have been a key part of it, and I'm especially encouraged by your participation. But again, I hope that this has been something, as we start to finish up and conclude this study, that it's been something that for your faith has made you a stronger Christian, and that we all together can work on some of these things and build on it as we strengthen our family at Falls Church. We got a few more folks that are waiting to come in, and I want to frame this week, do a little bit of recap. Seems like every week Kelly and I, also known as the sound booth, have tried some different methods of technology, and this week we're going to try me running the slides and me sharing the screen and all this stuff. I hope it doesn't crash, but we'll see. So for the last several weeks, we've talked a lot about individual aspects of community, and we talked for quite a while about various things and different aspects of the broader sense of community. And for the last several weeks, we've talked a lot of things about some individual aspects of community, and how our sin and some of the things that we are challenged with can be a challenge in how participatory, how much we're able to be a part of, a community of faith. And today I want to talk about grace, and I want to talk about its enduring nature. And it's going to be a more practical study today. It's going to be more practical in the sense of, how we can position ourselves and work much in an athletic way to be ready for and in a place that not only can we accept the grace of God, but that it can be a something that really continues to transform us. And I probably haven't said transform enough. It's implied, but sometimes you don't want to leave the implied sitting on the table. Sometimes you need to pick it up and do something with it. And the whole impetus of this study has been about transformation in my mind. And I hope that it's been implied, it's been inferred, but I want to make it more explicit, because I think that we have to always look at, as Christians, how our lives become more transformed, how we become more, not like God, because we'll never be like God, but that will be more Christ-like, will be more in line with what God would have us to be. And there's so many aspects of what that is. So within the Christian community, I've wanted this to be a study that's about transforming us as a whole group. It takes us transforming individually, because the entirety of the parts help the whole. And so today we're going to talk more about what some of these aspects are about grace, and how we can really get ourselves positioned in a way that it's an enduring nature. It's an enduring transformation that we go through. As I look across the screen, I see so many different ages, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, but you ask maybe Steven Sally. I'm up one corner. It's almost like a wrestling match. I got Steven Sally Dasher in the upper left-hand corner, and I got Gina and Rick Deiler in the right-hand corner. But you look at the ages of people across the screen, and you would ask them, "You got it all figured out? You got it all right yet?" They'd probably laugh at you and shake their heads. Yep, Gina gave me this, the funny thumbs up. Of course I do. Of course we don't. The transformation is lifelong. The transformation is a continual process. You don't arrive at 35. You don't arrive at 45. It's a continual process of transformation, and it's hard. And so today we're going to talk about what some of those aspects are. So with that being said, I'm going to try and share the screen. I hope. Let's see. I don't know if this is gonna work. Let's do this. Oh, there we go. I hope you guys can see it. Can you guys see it? Am I getting a thumbs up? Thumbs up by Steve. It works. It's perfect. So it's the endearing nature of grace that I want to go over today, and it's important that we talk about this, because what helps me understand community and what helps me work on things is sometimes getting into a position where we understand how to get better. And one of the things that I want to set the stage with is I want to talk a little bit about willpower. If we were to really look at willpower, if we all had the willpower, we probably would all be thin, beautiful, amazing skin colored, textured, hair looking, everybody kind of people, but life has a different story. Over the last several years, I've worked hard at losing weight, then I mess up my foot, put a little weight back on, and, through willpower, I'll do this and I'll do that, and I'll exercise, and I'm going to eat this. And, magically the weight doesn't go away. And all of a sudden I'm realizing at 40 or close to 40, I'm less than a month away. The countdown is on. It's almost like the space rocket launch we saw a couple of weeks ago. That I'm about to hit that mountaintop and start to slide down. And I realized that my body is a lot different than it was when I was out of college, and I've got to do something different. And I haven't figured it out yet. But willpower, one of the things that I hope that I have, and strong, and all this in my mind, of course, I think that I've got all this ability and all this whatever. Willpower starts to all of a sudden become something that you recognize and realize isn't as strong. The word power is a little deceiving. And so one of the things that we want to look at today is what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. And there's a very specific word that he uses that I hope that my screen will catch up to. Here we go. This is where it starts to get a little funny. There we go. And it's a Greek word, and this English spelling is really terrible. So if you try to enunciate this, please record it and send it in, and I'll play it next week. But the actual enunciation of it, it's egotenoi, and it's the Greek word for what's translated in 1 Corinthians in two words as self-control. And the first part of that word, the root word, that again, the English is really bad. And I thought, well, if I put the Greek, it's going to be hard. I'll do the English. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the screen. Again, you can try to enunciate this at home and have some fun while I'm talking. But it's the ego. It's the control of the ego. Now, we've talked about identity and we've talked about idols, and it's the id. Again, we're starting, this has been hopefully this has been a study where you've picked up on, how we talk about the ego and our identity and ourselves, because at the root of transformation, at the root of change, is the heart and the mind and the soul of who we are. And that's how the strength and that's how the power of the gospel really comes through, is that we realize and recognize that the warring factions within our own selves are what either hold us back or enable us to be transformed and to become better. And so what we're going to talk about these 4 key things about how Paul emphasizes the importance of self-control in 1 Corinthians. And we're going to talk about not only the importance of self-control, but how he actually kind of talks a little bit about how willpower really doesn't work. And we're also going to cover how grace transforms our approach to self-control and in the enduring grace of the gospel. And lastly, why this is so important in a community of believers. And so in Corinthians, of course, we get the reference to this in an athletic way. And we also see in other parts of the New Testament where we're talking about running the race and so many things. And we have to recognize and realize that it's not something that we can all identify with. We're not all super crazy, awesome athletes. In fact, I don't know of any off the top of my head at church. I know John Watterson's pretty fit. Chris was a big time basketball player, Chris McMillan. And so there's some others, and some of us were all at one point mildly athletic. Kelly and I did a lot of sports. I mean, some of you did high school sports. I would say that that's a very active lifestyle that we led. but the athletic, the nature of athletes, when you think about some of this is just about the physical side of things, because he uses an athletic analogy as he starts this out about training and everything, other kinds of things, is that these athletes oftentimes do immense training, and not only the physical nature, but the mental nature. And we're not left with the athletic analogy, but to the Roman audience, and Paul was one of those, the Olympics, and you think about where they were at even way back then, the body was something that was somewhat even worshipped, obviously. And excuse me. And it's important to recognize that when we look at current day athletics, we look at current day top shape athletes, those who are at the top of their game, they do certain things, and it's important to them because their bodies are what allow them to be in a position to win and to be top contenders in a sport. And what Paul is doing in this part of Corinthians is he's talking about and using this analogy about the body and about training, because you can't be at the top of your game. I can't even begin to think about running or doing any sorts of really higher level activity aside from what I'm doing right now if I don't train. And he does this because they understood that about the body. They understood that about that component. And the questions that we have from this is, somewhat is, why do they train? How do they eat? All these different things that they prioritize. And they do this because in their minds as athletes, they're going towards something. It's the prize, it's the championship, it's the Masters, it's the claret jug if you're over at the British Open, it's the MVP trophy if you're Michael Jordan, if any number of things. I mean, it's all sorts of trophies, and that's what they're going for. That's what is in the mind's eye of so many athletes and the things that they train for. It's a championship, and they're choosing the important things, not the urgent things. And that's something that I want to hit on to start, is that there are some things that seem urgent, near term, and I've got to do this right now because this is what's going to make me into this. But then there's important things, long-term training, stuff that are just fundamentals. And again, if we were able to talk to any sort of high caliber athlete or someone who's at a higher level, we'd understand that there were some things that they never got away from. And there's the trends and the fads and all these other kinds of things. And that ultimately it became this commitment in their mind and their heart about what they really, really wanted, what they were really going for. And if you're going to go for this, you've got to do this, or the series of thises. And that's how Paul, starts this out in that part of 1 Corinthians, is the training and the things that they do. Because they understood that if you were going to have to be able to lift this kind of weight, or if you were going to do this kind of a thing, these are the things that you always have to do. You always have to condition. And to not beleaguer the point about athletics, Kate has recently just gotten back in the pool after several months off. She's a big swimmer. And, one of the things that Kelly and I talked about was what it would be like, and, how much, what would be her conditioning, because we both, as again, having played sports, that conditioning is so important. That she hadn't been in the pool. She was going to remember the strokes. She remembers how to swim. It's almost like biking. You don't forget it. But the training was so critical, and getting back in the pool, and she was doing it several days a week, and the duration, and, when she first got down a couple of times and doing it really minimally, it was hard. She was tired because she was out of shape. And there were some things, especially with swimming and other things, that you just have to do continuously. It's a training. It's a priority. And so we have to ask ourselves, why do the athletes do this? Why do they do all these things? Again, this isn't about the analogy of sports, because we're not going to talk about sports today, but it's that prioritization and that importance about self-control is what we're going to hit on when we talk about this enduring grace. Because the folks that are at the highest caliber and everything else, instead of doing what's urgent, or, I'm going to do this as swimming, I'm going to work on something else. I remember one time, and then we'll leave this slide, when I talked to one of Kate's coaches about something with swimming. And this comes from a guy who's only swam in a lake, never swam competitively anything a day in my life. And I remember saying something about speed and asking a coach about something with Kate. And they said, we don't want to sacrifice her fundamentals because her strokes are so good, she does this, and he rattled off several different things just for doing something faster, because in the long run, that faster will actually hurt her because her fundamentals are so strong. It's more important that we do that. And I'll never forget reading that email thinking, that shows you how much I know about swimming and how much they know, first off. But second off, in the long run, it's more important that she focus on those fundamentals to be a good high caliber swimmer, which she really is. And so I remember from that example, even in my own life, how important it was for the fundamentals and the long-term view in athletics for her at such a young age. At that point, she was only 10. That would help her in the long run. So why do they do all this? Why do athletes do all these things? Why is it so important? And it's to get that prize. But it's that proper order of training, and it's the mindset that prize, that victory, that if you're my daughter, that ribbon, if you're swimming. And so I want to bring us into some aspects of the Bible now, and some of the things about the gospel, about the long-term nature, about self-control, and some good examples of that. It's Jacob and Rachel, and he worked long time, 7 years at a job, and it was so important to him. It was a terrible job. It was backbreaking. It seemed like it was forever, but he loved her so much, and he was so committed to her that he even said that he thought it was just for a number of days that he worked it, not years. But he loved her so much that, his heart was set on her and his love for her, and what he was going to do to gain her affection. And he ultimately, that heart became his ultimate lighthouse. I mean, it became his ultimate goal. And so the question kind of then becomes, for us as believers, how do we do this? How do we do these things? How do we, our prize, of course, as Paul laid out, was that eternal home and glory. It was getting to heaven. It's about finishing the race, as we see in other parts of the Bible. It's also about the different aspects about how we train, how we prioritize, how we do the long-term things, and not necessarily what's the urgent. And we do it by ordering our heart in the ways that a world-class athlete does their training. And it comes from things that we do. And Paul tells us that the only ultimate goal that we have not only is getting to heaven, but it's how we get to heaven. And this is where we get into some more of the practical. And so just like an athlete, when it comes to our enduring grace, when it comes to being someone that continues to grow and continue to be transformed, if we think back, again, to the very start of our class, the woe-tos and the blessed ed and put on love, the identity, the epithemia, the really strong sense, the really strong love of things that Paul sort of warned them about. When we think about the lovers of the strange, of inviting people into our homes and into our lives and the relationships that we start with, and when it comes to our community of faith, that we start with a position of forgiveness, all these things. How do we do all these things? How do all these things become the parts of who we are? And that transformation and this thing that we've been going through for so many weeks, the struggles that we have with sin, is that we have to order these things in our lives. We have to train as believers. We have to train in ourselves. And somewhat, I thought about the list that Joseph usually goes through. But just like the training and the physical activity, if we had to lump all the physical activity into one thing, the number one thing is worship. What do we worship? And this goes back to some when we talk about idols. But what do we worship? And when you think of worship, it's more than just what we're going to do at the building here in a little bit, or that we've watched on Zoom. It's not just singing songs in communion and listening to a sermon. Worship is our entirety. It's our heart, it's our mind, it's our soul that we pour into something because it's so important. And so when we think about worshiping God, and if we've misordered what we worship, it can be causing us a lot of problems. And again, these are things that we talked about when we talked about idolatry and we talked about identity, but it comes back up when we talk about this training. And so if we've made a career one of those big things that we worship, if it's another person that we worship, if it's someone that's causing us problems, or if it's someone that we just wish that I would be so complete if I had this person. If it's wealth, if I had this money, I would be great. If it's a car, I would have this status. Again, all these things that are idols. But if those are the things that we worship, if those are the things, that we're going to have so much problems, so many significant issues and challenges, that if that is our aspect of worship, we're likely crumbling and we're losing that self-control. And that's where when we go back and we talk about willpower. If athletes don't train, well, I'll run that mile tomorrow. I'll run that 10 miles tomorrow. I've never trained for a marathon. Some of you may have run a marathon. I can only imagine that running a marathon would be the most torturous thing that someone would ever want to do to their bodies. And I don't think that I'll ever be able to run a marathon, nor do I ever want to run a marathon. But I do know that in running a marathon, you have to train for many, many, many weeks. And you significantly increase the miles that you have to run. And it's so critical. It's so important that you do that in such a long term that it becomes one of the single most important things to be able to hit that goal. And so when we think about that self-control, if you lose that in that, and again, we go back to an athletic analogy, but you don't just wake up and a week later run 26 miles. But if you say, well, I'll do that training again tomorrow, you're going to fall behind. And you lose the self-control. And it's one of those things that you start to crumble, and all of a sudden the urgent becomes so critical. And if these things, these idols, these things that we place and we prioritize in our heart become so important, what happens is that self-control starts to erode, and all of a sudden these things become urgent, and it just goes downhill from there. And we can go back to so many of the various studies that we've had where challenges and sin and idolatry in our hearts just really take a hold, and we've talked about what they've done. And so when we talk about this self-control, when we talk about the willpower and how little it actually is possible, I think there's 4 distinct things that we can look at. And again, this is one of the more practical studies that we've had. But this enduring grace, this enduring nature of God's grace is so important to keep us not only full and whole in a wonderful, amazing way, but it continues that transformation. And it's 4 different things, It's staying rooted in the scripture. And so one of the things that we look at and we think about the enduring nature of grace and the training, look at so many times whenever Jesus is challenged or when he talks about things, especially when he was in the desert. He says 3 words. I was going to say there's 4. He says 3 words. When Satan is tempting him, he says, even though you're all muted, it is written. And he references scripture. When they come to get him in the garden, he talks about the fulfillment of scripture. When Peter wants to do this, he talks about scripture. He talks about scripture so much that he is rooted in the word. And part of Christ's worship and everything that he dwelled on, that was and again, Jesus was perfect. Now, come on, get real here. His thing was that scripture was written on his heart. And it says that for us too. to let these things be written on our hearts so that we will be rooted in that wonderful nature of the gospel. And so scripture was one of those things, and spending time in the word, spending time. And again, last week we talked about how fear really throttled and challenged a community of believers. And remember, fear is the absence of thinking. And if you think about so many different times, again, I'm using Jesus, but he was still human. He feared that death. He wanted that cup to pass from him, but he didn't. And he was afraid of it. Please, God, let this pass from me. I mean, imagine you totally understand and you totally know what is about to happen. A crucifixion on the cross, the nails, tearing his clothes off. I mean, all these things. He knew what was going to happen. But to fulfill the promise of God, to fulfill Scripture, to fulfill that prophecy, grace, everything that he did, it was partially because of his root in Scripture, and he understood and he knew the ultimate plan. Number 2, balanced expectations. I think anybody, again, if I had to do the corners again, if I went back to that screen, you would see some of the more wiser, aged folks at church and just ask them how quick things have happened. And I think they would laugh at you and probably say, happened? How about, have they happened yet? And I know that I've seen that in my life. And again, I'm just dancing around the corner to 40. That sometimes we have expectations that are high, and then sometimes we have them low, and we're blown away, or we're just incredibly just decimated because we've wanted something sooner, or we expected something different. And Paul talks about that to a large degree in this too, by that part of 1 Corinthians, whenever he talks about, in the age of man. And he kind of goes through that being in a community of believers that we're going to get to helps you understand and keep that perspective that our expectations aren't too high, but then they're also not too low. This helps us because it's important that even when we go back to this idea of training, that it's the long haul. It's things that we do and we do for a long time that transforms us and that builds us in ways that we really want to be. 3rd, community. Your community helps you overcome the problems of self-control. And next week, I want to kind of talk about some of this a little bit more fully. But if you'll remember the story about David and Bathsheba, there's a lot to that story. But one of the things that kind of happens at the end that sort of kind of wakes up David and makes him mad and angry, but it was necessary, was when Nathan kind of told the story and kind of did something in front of everybody where he called out David and what he did to Uriah. And it really made him upset. And it was important because Nathan sort of called out David for something that he did that was really pretty terrible. And sometimes, if we want to have more self-control, if we really want to make sure that we're growing in the gospel, that we're doing things that are longer run, longer term, and not short term and urgent, and which leads us down really challenging paths, the community of faith is a group that is there for you to overcome the problems that you have when you lack self-control. Well, I've got to do this, and I want this kind of money, or I want this person, or I want this job, or I want this car. And it takes sometimes a community of faith, and Paul talks about that too in so many different places, in so many different ways. But in 1 Corinthians, he talks about the group, with men, again, and with other believers, that helps people understand that this is in a group of accountability. Now, I've always been a fan of team sports. And Kate's a swimmer, and it's very individualized, and it's still a team. And there's a component of accountability that you have with teammates that lift you up or that you lift them up when it's necessary. And it's something that I've always wanted my kids to do, is be in team sports and to have that sense of community and that sense of accountability, because when one player really messes up, it messes up the whole team. And we've seen that time and again, whenever there's been bad players or there's been something that's gone wrong. It's important in golf to have a really good caddy. I mean, there's so many things that you don't get around when it comes to other people helping you out. And if anything, throughout these amazing stories of life and other things that aren't so much gospel related, we likely realize and start to see how other people are critical in us getting better. They're critical for us to stay on a good path. They're critical for athletes, for executives, for anybody else to see any sort of success. Is you got to have other people who are there to help you and keep you accountable as well. Now, we don't have time today, and I don't want to get into it, but again, there's elements of rebuke, and there's elements of repentance that are important in this as well. So we're kind of doing an overarching theme here about community. But it's so important for us to remember that in getting to heaven and enjoying this enduring grace and the self-control, the long-term vision, the view that we have of all these things we've talked about for so many weeks, that community is absolutely critical to support us, to love us, to care for us. And that comes across in a lot of different ways. And the last is faithfulness in God, being tempted beyond what you can handle. And Paul talks about that pretty explicitly. And there's a lot of times that you and me and all of us have all wondered about that one line, that we will not be tempted, we will not be given too much more than we can handle. And at times we probably wonder, I don't know how I'm going to handle this. There's probably been over the last several weeks. I know I have. I'm sure you have too. How are we going to handle this? How are we going to do this? How am I going to do this? And you realize quickly that you can't do it alone. You've likely engaged a lot of folks at church, friends and family across the country, friends that you've got at other churches. But it's that faithfulness in God. Again, it's like we talked about last week. It's thinking through and not being fearful. But the faithfulness of God, he's always there. And he said as much. I'm with you always until the end of the age. Paul says that here as well. Until the age of man is ended. There are things that we have to remember, that God is always faithful to us. The question isn't about that. The question is our faithfulness to God and where we're at when it comes to him. And so it's important that we look at all four of these things. And these are the elements of training. These are the orders of our heart. And it's important that we realize and recognize that as athletes eat particular kinds of food, particular kinds of training regimens of aerobic exercise to weight exercise, all the different things, right? The important things that they do, the amount of free throws they shoot. I remember shooting tons of free throws. I was a terrible free throw shooter, but I remember shooting tons of free throws after practice because it was just the routine. It was the mechanics. It was everything that you got down to get better at it. And those were the things that you always did, that you always worked on, that were always important, that you always wanted to, because again, you were striving for something that was so critical to you. And these are the things that when we think about worshiping that kind of stuff, worshiping the career, worshiping the people, worshiping the status, worshiping the money, the wealth, that these are components of our worship as believers, of scripture, of balanced expectations, of community, and faithfulness of God. The enduring nature of grace is important because as we've talked for the last several weeks about all these components of sin, those were hard lessons. I'll tell you, there were times and nights I lost sleep over those things because they were really hard to talk about. When we talk about the addictive nature of sin, when we talk about the way sin really starts to contort our heart and our minds, when we talk about fear, when we talk about idols, when we talk about all these different things, it's amazing whenever we study this kind of stuff, we realize how challenging it is to live, to exist, to be in this world that's a really challenging world, especially right now. And one of the most important things that we have to remember is that God wants us in heaven. He loves us so incredibly much. The tools and the resources that he has given us to get there are immense and they're significant. And with so many ways and so many times that I laugh and think, oh, wouldn't it just be awesome to be able to talk to God in the way that Elijah has done, that Moses has done, that so many have done, the way God talked to Paul on the road to Damascus. All these things that I wish I've had. I can read it. I can see it in scripture. I can see the challenges that believers had on so many different things that I've had, and I can look at this screen. I can see balanced expectations are so important. And we've heard the phrase, and sometimes we just chalk it up as it's just another religious platitude of, God's time versus our time. And that's a real thing. The older I get, the more I realize that. And my expectations have really started to get a little bit better. I'm working on it. It's hard to not only be patient, but to realize that God has something for me better, that when something doesn't work, when something doesn't happen in the last several weeks, I'll tell you guys, we've tried to buy a house 3 different times and it's not worked. 3 times. You'd think third time was the charm, right? Nope. but we tried and it hasn't worked. And it's not the real estate agent's fault. She's pretty awesome. It's just there's something better. It's going to work out. It's going to be fine. And outbalance expectations. During this time, our community has been pretty amazing. All of you have been engaging on this class, and you've been a part of the lives. Our emergency call team, our elders have been working hard, praying over our congregation. You know, we've been a blessed group of believers for a long time, but these last several months have really shown me just how much we've taken care of each other and how much we've held each other accountable and how much that we've come together. And I think a lot of it is centered on that last one, and I'll wrap it up here as we finish. It's been around a lot of our faithfulness in God, and I want to share this last side with you. I think this is what really caps it off for me for this week and even throughout the entirety of what these last several months that I've seen. That ultimately it's not willpower, it's gospel power. And that for us as believers, the gospel is what has transformed you and me and will transform us more. You know, our willpower is really limited. Well, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to think this. I'm not going to act that way. And then we realize that we do, and it's frustrating, and there's a whole another class or 2 or 4 that we could do on so many of those things. But it's the gospel power that really sustains us, that transforms us. Those long-term things of community, of scripture, of fellowship, it's the worship of God in those ways that is the biggest component of our heart that we experience, and we are filled with the enduring grace of God. They're not easy. And it's just like any athlete. If you train and you get out of shape, it's harder to get back in shape. But when you are, and you can run, you can compete, you can do things, it's wonderful. And when your mind and when your heart is centered on Christ, and we're worshiping him, and we're loving God and keeping his commandments, we're rooted in scripture and community, we realize that God has a plan for us that's wonderful and far better than we could ever imagine, then we are more self-controlled, and we endure, and we don't do what's urgent. We do what's important and necessary, long run, because ultimately the home that we want to have is in heaven. Not the 3 homes that I've tried to buy with Kelly, not the car that we'll have to buy at one point, or the job I may have that's different, or whatever else. Those things don't matter. And that's been hard the last several weeks, I'll be honest, because there's some things that we want to have that are important to us. They're important to God. God's going to take care of us. And so God's got something better lined up for you, for me, for us. And guess what? It's not here in as much as it is in heaven. A wonderful, wonderful home one day. And it's the gospel power that's going to get us there, not our willpower. So I hope this class has been good. Next week, we're going to do a recap, kind of go over what we've talked about for this quarter. It should be fun. I want to open it up for comments and thoughts. Some of y'all have sent things to me. I don't want to talk the entire time, but I hope that you'll have something to say, either that I've said that's really frustrated you, which is perfectly fine, or just things that have come about that we think about as we have more opening and we're together more, and all these things start to kind of change in a way that's even this new normal that we're getting into, that we'll be around each other some more, and things will be a little bit like they were, but nothing will probably be the same as it was. So as we think about willpower and the gospel power, I look forward to next week. I look forward to the time that we're going to share together. And also, if you're up at the building here in a little bit, the time that we're going to have in worship, either online or in person. Thank you all for being here again this morning, and we'll see you next week.